When I first stumbled upon the writings of Arthur Schopenhauer, I wasn't looking for wisdom. In fact, I was at one of the lowest points in my life. Broke, emotionally drained, and freshly divorced. My name's Jonathan Cole, and at 42 I thought I had everything figured out. That is, until life showed me how little I really knew. I remember walking into a dusty old bookstore in Indianapolis that day. The kind of place that smelled like ancient paper and forgotten dreams. I wasn't even trying to buy a book. I just wanted to kill time before heading back to my lifeless apartment. I picked up a small, tattered book that had a strange title, The Wisdom of Life. It was written by Arthur Schopenhauer, a name that sounded more like a spell than a person. I sat in the corner of the shop, opened it, and within 10 minutes I was transported. Schopenhauer's words were blunt, cynical even, but oddly comforting. Unlike the endless stream of self-help gurus promising instant happiness, this man seemed to say, life is suffering, but here's how to make peace with it. And somehow that honesty was exactly what I needed. The first idea that struck me hard was his belief that our inner world determines our happiness far more than external circumstances. I had always believed that once I had the right job, the perfect wife, a big house, and a shiny car, then I'd be happy. But I had all of those things at one point, and I was still miserable. Schopenhauer argued that the wise person doesn't chase status or possessions. Instead, they build a rich inner life. That idea haunted me for weeks. I started journaling, something I hadn't done since college. I'd sit down every morning with a cup of stale black coffee and write down everything I felt: anger, regret, confusion. It wasn't pretty, but slowly I began to understand myself in a way I never had. My friend Marcus, a childhood buddy who was now a therapist, noticed the shift in me. He said, "You've stopped trying to escape your pain. That's huge." I told him about Schopenhauer, and he laughed. He's not exactly a feel-good philosopher, but he's real. That was the thing, he was real. He didn't sugarcoat life. He faced it head-on. And that inspired me to do the same. The second lesson I learned was about desire. Schopenhauer believed that human desire is a trap. We crave something, we get it, and then we crave something else. It's a never-ending cycle. I thought about how I had worked overtime for promotion, got it, celebrated for a day, and then immediately started stressing about the next raise. I was always chasing something. So I tried an experiment. For 1 month I stopped chasing. I didn't strive to meet new women, didn't look for a new job, didn't fill my evenings with distractions. Just existed. I walked in the park. I read. I listened to jazz. And something surprising happened. I felt content. Not thrilled, not euphoric, but grounded. Like I was actually living in the moment for the first time in decades. My sister, Emily, noticed the difference. "You seem calmer," she said. "Less intense." That month taught me more about peace than any vacation I ever took. I started meditating too, something Schopenhauer practiced long before it was trendy. He saw it as a way to detach from the endless noise of the mind. At first, I could barely sit still for 5 minutes without fidgeting. But over time I learned to breathe through the chaos. And I discovered a stillness in myself that had always been buried beneath layers of stress and ambition. Another powerful lesson came from Schopenhauer's views on solitude. He believed that solitude isn't something to be feared. It's where the mind becomes clear. First, I hated being alone. After my divorce from Melissa, the silence in my apartment was deafening. I'd turn on the TV just to drown out my own thoughts. But the more I read Schopenhauer, the more I understood that being alone isn't the same as being lonely. One night I turned everything off: no TV, no phone, no music. I sat on my couch, a warm cup of tea in my hands, and I just listened to the silence. It was terrifying at first, but then it became peaceful. I started doing it more often. And in those quiet moments, I began to hear the voice inside me that had been drowned out for so long. I remember one evening I was sitting in silence, and a thought came to me as clear as day. You don't need to be fixed. You need to be understood. That moment changed everything. I stopped trying to become someone else. I started accepting who I already was. I had flaws, yes, but I also had depth, compassion, and strength. I didn't need to be the life of the party or the top performer at work. I just needed to be real. Over time, I began to change the way I lived. I started spending more time with people who actually made me feel seen. I cut ties with shallow acquaintances who drained my energy. I picked up classical guitar again, something I hadn't touched since college. Music became my therapy. I would spend evenings on the porch, strumming chords and watching the sun dip behind the trees. Those were the happiest moments of my life. Not because they were extraordinary, but because they were real. One day, my nephew Caleb came to visit. He was 19, fresh out of high school, and already anxious about the future. "Uncle John," he said, "how do you know what you're supposed to do in life?" I smiled and handed him a copy of The Wisdom of Life. "Start with this," I said. "But don't expect answers. Expect better questions." He looked puzzled but curious. "This guy any good?" I laughed. "He's honest. That's better than good." Seeing Caleb reminded me of who I used to be. Restless, desperate to figure everything out. But Schopenhauer taught me that life isn't a puzzle to be solved. It's a river to be experienced. You can try to control the current, but you're better off learning how to float. As the months passed, I noticed another shift in me. I was no longer angry about the past. I wasn't bitter about the divorce or the job I lost, or the years I wasted chasing the wrong things. I saw them all as chapters in a larger story. Schopenhauer once wrote that suffering is the root of all learning, and I finally understood what he meant. Without those struggles, I never would have grown. I never would have discovered what truly matters. Eventually, I started sharing what I'd learned. Not in a preachy way, but in simple conversations. At the coffee shop, I talked to strangers about mindfulness. At work, I helped younger employees find balance. I even started a podcast called Stillness and Coffee, where I talked about philosophy in everyday language. To my surprise, it caught on. People were hungry for truth, not hype. One message from a listener stood out to me. It was from a woman named Grace in Oregon. She wrote, "I listened to your episode on Schopenhauer and cried. I felt so alone in my thoughts, like no one understood the weight of existence. But you reminded me that I'm not crazy. I'm just awake." I read that message over and over. It reminded me that the lessons I'd learned weren't just for me. They were for anyone brave enough to look beneath the surface of life. Few years later, I met someone new. Her name was Rachel. She was a high school literature teacher with a soft voice and a fierce intellect. We met at a local bookstore. Fitting, right? Our first conversation was about Dostoevsky and Schopenhauer, and I knew then that this wasn't going to be just another fleeting connection. She didn't try to fix me. She understood me. And in her presence, I didn't have to perform. Could just be.